So Jake Dickert leaving Washington State for Wake Forest is an indictment on two things. Number one, the state of college football, and number two, the state of Washington State athletics. So Washington State has to make a decision. Are they going to be able to pull together enough to continue funding at a Power 4 level? Because the early indications are that they can't. Maybe they want to. Maybe they're trying to. They made a big-time offer to John Mateer. It was in the seven-figure range, but it wasn't enough. And you know what? On the one hand, that may be all Washington State is capable of up there in Pullman. They don't have a big money donor like a Phil Knight at Oregon or anybody like that, or they don't have the same sort of tradition that SEC programs maybe do of high-level spending from donors and supporters of the program. Doesn't mean there aren't people up there who care about Washington State athletics. There absolutely are. But this is another example of where we're at in college sports, because Washington State didn't just have their head football coach, who, by the way, was all in on Washington State, wanted to make it work there, and then bolted for Wake Forest. I'll get to that in just a moment. He didn't just leave after he was the interim, or what he called the interviewing head coach. Then he becomes the head coach. He's had a lot of success up there. I think Jake Dickert is a good football coach. But for him to then go to Wake Forest and say, in his opening press conference when asked about it, we didn't have the resources to keep all the guys we want up there. Well, either something fundamentally has to change in Pullman, or they have to just accept their fate as being a third tier, I wouldn't even say second tier per se, financial institution in college athletics. You don't have to like it. You don't have to like it, Washington State fans, but that's where it's at. And so you lose a coach who doesn't just leave Washington State for a job where he feels like he has access to more resources, where he can get paid more money. You didn't just lose Kyle Smith down to Stanford, which is an institution that has a wishy-washy commitment to athletics, but is able to pay Kyle Smith more than what he was making up at Washington State, which is why there wasn't a real chance. The salary that the men's basketball coach at Washington State now has, significantly less than what Kyle Smith had before. There have just been a lot of financial woes. I think there is equal responsibility on the university and also the state of college athletics, because this is where we're at. There are places that just can't get to the certain level. But you have to wonder, are they 100% all in? Are they willing to spend top dollar to keep this coach, to put all the money they can into an NIL collective? It looked like they were for John Mateer, and we'll see what happens with their situation going forward. But Jake Dickert didn't just leave Washington State. He left them for Wake Forest. So I've compared this to Jonathan Smith leaving Oregon State for Michigan State. It feels the same way. You lose a bunch of staff, you lose a bunch of players, everything feels like it's falling apart in disarray. And Oregon State, they took it on the teeth this year. 5-7, no bowl game, couple of good wins, but overall, it was rough. And now Oregon State has reset. They have dug their heels in and said, okay, you know what? We are going to make sure that when the Pac-12 is a conference again, with 8 or more schools, that we're at the top financially. That it's us, Boise State, and whoever else wants to join us. That's how it appears. That's what getting Malik Murphy feels like to me. That's a level of commitment that Oregon State fans were understandably worried about. When is that moment going to arrive for Washington State? Because so far all the indications are, nope, they just can't do it. Whether they can't or won't, I don't know all the details of that. I'm not trying to rip on Pullman. I know people have gone to school up there. It looks like an awesome college town. And you know what? I bet it is an awesome college town. But Jake Dickert left Washington State for Wake Forest. That is dramatically different than Jonathan Smith leaving Oregon State for Michigan State. Michigan State, financially, remember what they were paying Mel Tucker per year? $9.5 million. That's one of the 10 to 15 highest coaching salaries in all of college football. That's what they're willing to put forward. Wake Forest does not have the tradition. Wake Forest The commitment level, we'll see. It's clearly higher than Washington State, or Jake Dickert wouldn't have left. But financially, is Wake Forest, or with pedigree, are they near the top of the ACC? No, they are not. So Washington State, financially, in the viewpoint of Jake Dickert, is at such a disadvantage here that he's willing to go to a place where you don't historically win at a high level. Where the expectations are, can you be competitive, make some bowl games? Like, Dave Clawson retired. I don't know that he was forced out. I don't know every detail of that situation. Admittedly, maybe he was after they failed to make a bowl game this season. But that's not the same caliber of job in the ACC as Michigan State is in the Big Ten. If you are running Michigan State correctly, we have seen this before, by the way. If you are running Michigan State correctly, you can win the Big Ten. You can beat Ohio State and Michigan in the same year. If you're doing the best job you possibly can at Wake Forest, is that a job that you could go toe-to-toe year in and year out with Mario Cristobal at Miami and Dabo Swinney at Clemson and Florida State when they're right? No, it feels like a program to me that you go to, and if you're doing an outstanding job, you have an 8 or 9 win season and it feels like you just earned a big contract extension. It feels more like Maryland and Rutgers in the Big Ten, where 8, 9 wins, that's a great year. There's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But that is the point that I'm trying to get at here. These two departures are not the same. Michigan State can be a great job in the Big Ten. Would anyone ever describe Wake Forest as a great job? It's the third job in its own state, in its own conference. I'd rather have the Duke job. I'd rather have the North Carolina job. But Dickert was willing to go that particular route. That is an indictment of where we're at. And so there are big questions facing Washington State right now. Are they going to be able to get their situation together financially? And if not, how high a level can they compete at? How long can they retain coaches? That's the question. As for Jake Dickert at Wake Forest this year, I don't foresee him being the Curt Cignetti of the ACC. Then again, I didn't see Curt Cignetti being the Curt Cignetti of the ACC. So, sure, he could come in, he could completely surprise everyone. And I just struggle to see that place as being a place where you come in and you turn around that quick. Well, wait a minute. You would have said the same thing about Indiana. Jake Dickert's a good coach. He can win games at Wake Forest. I don't know if he can win a conference championship. But their conference schedule, in no particular order, contains at Duke and at Florida State. They have to go at Virginia. That's a sneaky tough game. At Virginia Tech. That's an easy place to play. Not. Georgia Tech, North Carolina, NC State, SMU. That feels more like a rough first year for Jake Dickert. Establish the culture sort of year for Jake Dickert and Wake Forest. And by the way, did you know, in one of the most interesting games out there that will just fly way under the radar, Wake Forest, because of a scheduling flip around, is not playing Ole Miss next year. They're playing, wait for it, Oregon State. How about that? Isn't the coaching carousel really, really fun? I think he can go there and win games. But the reason I don't see him as being a Cignetti is Curt Cignetti had established himself as a head coach at multiple locations, and he'd been there for a very long time. Jake Dickert hasn't been a head coach very long, all things considered. He's been there since the 21 season as Washington State's head coach. That's how long he's been a head coach at the college level. I think he's got a tough road ahead of him, but not an impossible one. I've seen far crazier things happen and crazier turnarounds. But the bigger takeaway I have on this, as I've thought about it for a few days, is that dichotomy of he was willing to go to a lower tier ACC job instead of a place where you, by any objective metric, have better access to the college football playoff now and in the future. That's not a fun situation to be in. I truly, legitimately, please hear me, Coug fans. I hope it gets better up there in Pullman. I just don't know how it does.